Hello and a very warm welcome to this VEREIN gegen Tierfabriken online event. Our guest this evening is Canadian photographer JoAnnes McArthur. Jo is at the forefront of a new and growing area in photography, animal photojournalism. Over the last decades, Jo has been documenting our treatment of non-human animals in over 60 different countries. And this work has won her many prestigious awards. Her photos are regularly published in major media outlets, and she already has 3 books under her belt, the most recent of which she'll be telling us more about this evening. Jo is also the subject of the incredibly moving documentary, The Ghosts in Our Machine, which accompanies her in her work, letting us see the highs and lows as well as the dangers of what she routinely faces. We'll be discussing Jo's work for about half an hour to 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for your questions. So please feel free to write them into the chat during the discussion anytime, and I'll get Jo to answer as many of them as we've got time for at the end. I'll also be asking Jo to announce the winners of the prize draw to take part in her photography masterclass, which is an online series of video classes that you can take part in. We've got 2 lucky winners from the prize draw. And the other thing I wanted to mention before we start, so that you get kind of maximum enjoyment, is that Jo will be sharing some stories around different photos of hers, and you're all able to enlarge the photos when we put them up in the screen, so that you can make our screens, our faces smaller so that you can see the photo better. But I'll remind you of that when we get to that. So Jo, welcome. It's lovely to have you as a guest once again.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for organizing all this.
Yeah, you're very welcome. We first had contact when you gave a talk at the Conference on Animal Rights in Europe in 2017 when it was held in Vienna. And you gave a talk where towards the end you mentioned a project, your project at that time was quite new, Unbound. And we were so inspired, we got you to come back in 2018 to tell us in particular about Unbound. And that was a very successful talk. And then later on, we also hosted a screening of the film, of the documentary film, The Ghosts in Our Machine, here in Vienna as part of our animal rights cinema. And people really loved that. So it's great to see you again, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about what you've been up to since then.
Yeah, well, and I'm so glad that my work's been able to contribute to the movement there and to discussions there. Feels great.
Yeah. Good. So let's start at the beginning with you. Can you tell us something about how did you get to where you are now? Do you come from a family of photographers? How did you discover this particular medium?
Just moving my camera here a little bit. I was obsessed with taking pictures because, you know, for a long time before I got into the animal work. And it's just because the camera is like a gateway to the lives of others and to satisfying my curiosity. And I'm a very curious person. I want to know why we do what we do. I want to know what makes us tick. And I find people really interesting. And I, you know, soon saw that the street photography and the photojournalism that I was interested in, well, I needed a focus. I couldn't just go around shooting everything that was interesting. That's not how you build a project and build a career. And so not aligned, but in tandem with my love for photography was my concern for animals. And eventually, soon enough, I realized that I would have my life's work cut out for me if I was going to focus on the lives of animals, not wildlife, not companion animals, but the hidden animals, which is, of course, what we're going to be talking about a lot today. But yeah, that was almost 20 years ago now that I started thinking, okay, well, animals need representation in the media much more than they have right now.
But when did you get your first camera then?
Oh, it was like I was borrowing my dad's old Minolta, you know, with one lens on it. And I didn't study photography. I took black and white printing courses, and on day 2 of the first printing course, I knew that I was going to do it for the rest of my life. Like, I had always liked taking pictures, but then when I got into the darkroom, I got absolutely obsessed. This was a lot more hands-on art, tactile, everything that I like. You know, I'm not super cerebral. I'm like very hands-on. I want to create. And so that was the dark room, and there was the creation of images through that little, you know, box, that miracle box.
So at what point then did animal rights and photography come together?
You know, it was, I was living at my mom's place out in the countryside for a little while, and she had 10 chickens, layer hens, that ran around outdoors with the dogs and the cats. And they were as sentient as the dogs and the other animals. They also wanted to come in the house. They wanted to be pet. They had complex personalities, but chicken was my favorite food, bar none, my favorite food. And I realized, I mean, that's why sanctuaries are so important, and seeing is so important, and hearing stories about sentience behavior, because then you get one-on-one experience with the individuality of others, and that really affected me. So back to these chickens, chicken was my favorite food, but I had chicken friends. I was like, oh gosh, okay, well, now my eyes have been opened and I can no longer eat animals. So I went from, you know, pescatarian to vegetarian to vegan. And yeah, it just, you know, it was a path that, you know, things just started coming together with the camera and with my knowledge of animals. But we're not taught about animal sentience in schools, and we're not taught to be socially responsible and compassionate for others. I mean, that's something that really needs to change, I think, in the coming decades, and it is changing. Humane education and you know, teaching us to be compassionate people. As like literally part of the curriculum, which we're seeing more of in North America, which is exciting, probably in Europe as well.
Yeah, that's another string to your bow, isn't it? I think you're a humane educator, you go into schools.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I show stories, and depending on the age group, I show stories that are age appropriate, and you know, get kids excited about, you know, just how smart pigs and cows are, and chickens, and them.
So did you have a time before photography as an animal rights campaigner, like doing stalls or outreach?
I did try a lot of that, and you know, it was enjoyable. Maybe not so much my forte. I do encourage people to figure out what they're best at and do that. So whether, you know, it's helping advance policy or writing, or whether you're into the sciences or the arts, if you are good at it, you'll probably do it longer and enjoy it more. And we need to consider those things in animal activism, because animal activism is just so hard, isn't it? It's such an uphill battle, and it can be so demoralizing. Yeah, so we need to focus on what we're good at, and often that's where we can create the most change as well. So for me, the change was, you know, using the camera and writing, as opposed to other activities that other people are better suited to.
Mm-hmm. You founded We Animals Media.
Yeah.
Every time I go to the website, it's getting bigger and bigger, and there's more and more projects. Tell us about what goes on at We Animals Media. How's it organized? How's it financed?
Yeah, it's so exciting. So We Animals Media grew out of my project, We Animals. So We Animals was just a project for maybe 13, 15 years. But the point of everything that I do is strategy and reaching the greatest number of people and affecting as many people as possible with the stuff that I'm shooting. So, you know, you can't just be one person taking pictures and rushing off to the next shoot and having all of this important work sit on your hard drive, which is what I was doing for a long time. And so I needed a team and a communication strategy and a marketing strategy and operations and people to build the project into a photo agency. we didn't realize we were building a photo agency. In fact, we're like, okay, let's build it up as a project and we'll have the archive. We'll make all of this work available for free to anyone helping animals. And then, hey, let's do the Unbound project, which, as you know, is about women on the front lines of animal advocacy. We'll make films, we'll do photos and stories. So let's do this, and let's bring on more photographers, let's mentor people. And so what all of this comes down to is really a photo agency. And so that's how we're rebranding and relaunching next month. And so it's a photo agency focusing on animal photojournalism, specifically the stories of hidden animals globally. It's not just my work. It's the work of many contributors now, which is exciting. And we'll function as a photo agency in that we give assignments and we have a repository of images that people can use for free or buy if they're for profit. We can, yeah, there's a lot we can do there. And to your question about funding, so I shot about 500 weddings to fund the documentary work, and I did food photography and all this to fund the good stuff, as I called it, which is in fact the very sad and depressing stuff, but it was the work I was most passionate about. And then enough people said, you know, Jo, you have a good reputation now, people know you, so you should probably start seeking out, you know, monthly donors and grants. I really hesitated doing that because I'm just, I do everything myself, and I'm not someone who likes to ask for help. But then when I did, thousands of dollars came in per month. And I was able to dedicate all of my time to the animal work instead of having to make ends meet with the wedding photography and such. And so from there, we've just kept building, and bigger grants, more support, which allows us to have staff and pay for a lot of assignments and all the things that go along with running a photo agency. It's kind of crazy. I mean, we have an archivist, we have designers, we have, social media, full-time social media person. So it's grown into a big, an NGO that I'm really, really proud of, and it's staffed with really passionate people, and we're growing. So I want people to keep an eye on us, and we have a lot of volunteers as well. So if people want to volunteer with us, if people want to shoot with us, all of that information is available on the website to look into.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. It's really interesting, isn't it, that we're often so afraid to ask. But if we're asking for something that other people feel strongly about, then often we can be so surprised that the willingness is there to get behind us.
And I should have known better, because I certainly love to support others who are doing good work. You know, it feels really good for me to make, you know, I make small donations to various NGOs, and I love it. I want to support. So I should have realized, oh, well, people might want to do the same for We Animals, and they have.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that really stands out about everything that you do. You seem to have collaboration with other professionals in your field as a priority. And how much of that is our overarching aims of animal rights that we share? Or how much is that just you, a very generous or unusual professional?
Thanks for asking. I love to share and I love to mentor. And again, my work it's not about building my career, it's about helping as many animals as possible. So that is always my goal. It's always my focus. So that really takes the lens off of me, which I love. I'm in front of the lens a lot just to talk about this stuff, but I really like, you know, just broadening what we do so that more people are doing it, so that we can help more animals. And so, yes, the spirit of We Animals Media is one of generosity, absolutely. It's how can we help NGOs with really good images and video? How can we mentor more photographers to do animal photojournalism and to tell more of those stories? And that is unusual in the photo world, because photographers tend to not work in packs. They are individuals and they're trying to build a name, like win the awards and all of this. Those are important things for me, because then it just gives me a broader platform to talk about animals, and it increases my like opportunities, I guess, to mentor others and to bring people into the fold. So different model in the photo world, but very proud of it. Yeah. Yeah. And also that's what we did with my book Hidden. I know we're getting to that, but this is a perfect segue. So my first two books were my own work, but Hidden It's called Hidden Animals in the Anthropocene. I'm the co-editor of this book with my British co-editor, Keith Wilson. He's a photography journalist. He writes about photography. And yeah, we solicited the work of many photographers. We poured over thousands and thousands of images, and the book ended up having 40 different photographers. I love this because it's a platform for all of their work. And it's also a statement saying this work is so important, the subject matter is so important that we have, 40 people who are doing it and contributing to the book. It's been a really exciting journey, but I think I'm getting ahead of myself here, ahead of the questions.
I also thought it was a good moment actually to ask you to just crystallize again the idea for us of the photo archive, because I think that's interesting for activists who are listening, people working for welfare organizations.
Thank you. So, as I said, my work was ending up just too much on a hard drive and not getting out into the world. And so we created the We Animals Archive, which now has over 10,000 photos and video from over 65 countries. And there's not just my work there now. It's the work of many photographers and many, many issues, whether you want fishing in the Mediterranean or gorillas in Uganda or pigs in Sweden or chickens in Australia. So there's a lot there. And we are actually launching a world-class archive. So the archive we have now is a little bit clunky, some of you may have noticed, but we have invested now in a fantastic archive. We're going to have a lot of the work there from the hidden contributors, and we are assigning shoots to people globally now. So it's going to be legitimately a full-blown archive and photo agency. Everything's moving so quickly too. It was just me with a camera for a long time, and it has grown quickly and moved quickly because it's an idea that's I can see, and we can see, the team and I can see this is important. People want to invest in it. People want to shoot for us. I even mentor National Geographic photographers now. It's really blowing my mind. It's funny, I have always wanted to infiltrate National Geographic with this kind of animal content, but I find that some of those shooters are coming to me now and they say, I'm a wildlife photographer, but I really want to change things and step it up and get more political. So how do you do what you do? So it's great.
Yeah, wow. That's a real sign of the times, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And sign of the times as well is that there was a lot of work in the photo world to move things away from just wildlife photography, beautiful pictures of animals, to something more political, which is conservation photography. And it was indeed some of the senior editors at National Geographic that pushed really hard to make that shift so that the images would be more useful to animals, to the planet, for every reason. And one of the senior editors there recently that I was speaking with said, Jo, it's true, what you're doing is the next frontier. We need to continue to open the door and push the envelope to evolve conservation photography, which is why We Animals Media labeled this new genre animal photojournalism, because it is different from conservation photography. It's not just a step away from it. It's inclusive of conflict photography. It is very photojournalistic. It's also street photography because there's animal use everywhere. And so we gave it a name and a description. And
let's focus on that a little bit. Maybe I can I have this quote from you, which we can use as a springboard to get into animal photojournalism. It's incredibly strong, an important quote, I think. You say, animal photojournalism descends from conflict photography in that the photographer is exposing a story that is kept hidden from the public through political and economic agendas. Thus, their images are necessary catalysts for change. And it really got me thinking because if we think about, there's this kind of cliche about photography that the photographer is a witness behind the lens and a mirror reflecting events behind the lens. And in many ways, that's quite passive. And listening to or reading that quote from you made me realize there's a lot more going on there. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I do think that the camera is a mirror, but you're right. You know, animal photojournalism is, you have to do a lot of work. You have to do a lot of prep, and you have to go out there and you have to put yourself at stake, which is what conflict photographers do. They put themselves on the line. Sometimes they have to, you know, be in very dangerous places. That's certainly what we're doing as animal photojournalists, or APJs for short, because it's a mouthful. Yeah, APJs have to, you know, really go the extra mile. We put ourselves in danger in that we are often trespassing or doing illegal work. I would say all of us would rather not that we're not doing anything illegal. We'd love to have access to animal labs, factory farms, fur farms, but that's not the case. These animals are hidden on purpose because they have absolutely excruciatingly miserable lives, and people would, you know, people reject that sometimes, and sometimes often when they see that. And this ties in with ag-gag laws, especially as they grow in Canada and in the USA. So these are laws that protect industries from view. In some states in the USA, I'm in Canada though, but in the USA, you can't even photograph a factory farm from a public street, public property. These places are so protected, and there's a lot of money and a lot of lobbying that goes into that. Animal activism doesn't have that amount of money and strategy, but yeah, it's a dangerous thing. I mean, you can be charged, you can be put in jail, you could face incredible fees and fines. It takes up a lot of your time. You can be beaten. I have had several investigator friends who have been caught on properties and beaten up very badly, even with baseball bats. So there's a lot that can happen, and there's a lot to consider when you're doing it. I always encourage people to consider very strongly what they are doing when it's illegal. Consider their safety, work with a team. It's very important. And conflict photographers do that as well. They often go out in groups, or they're working with NGOs. They're working with the UN. And that's what I do. I'm always out in the field with an NGO.
I mean, conflict photographers in kind of war zones and so on, I mean, they're wearing press. It's clear that they're members of the press, isn't it? That they have some kind of protection that way, which I guess is not the same for animal photojournalists.
No, we certainly don't. No, we can't have a press pass and, hey, we're just coming into your farm. And in fact, we look like terrorists because often we're wearing black and we've got masks over our face to conceal our identity. And when I talk about, like, it was probably 10 years ago, I started talking, saying, like, my work is like war photography. I wasn't saying that to bring attention so much to me or to photography, but to get people to question, like, what the heck does she mean? She photographs animals. How can she be a war photographer? So in a way, my use of this language is deliberate in that I'm trying to point out that there is something like a war on animals. Yeah, and there's so much violence perpetuated against them every second of every day that, yeah. So a war is how I see it, a silent war, an invisible war, and that's how wars happen sometimes. Sometimes genocides are happening for 6 months before really the international media picks it up. And it's the same thing with APJs. We have to go out to where things are invisible and photograph them and film them and scream about it and work with NGOs, work with mainstream media to get those stories out before, people start to see and think and change and care and think critically. All those important ingredients for change.
Yeah, it's a kind of dumb question maybe, but what's the difference between photojournalism and photography? Is it there's a story attached?
There's a story attached. Photojournalism is usually more newsy and more in-depth. It's a reportage, whereas photography is more an umbrella word for many different kinds of work. Yeah, and then animal photojournalism is specific to include all animals. That's another difference between conservation, animal photography, and APJ, is we wanted to distinguish it by including the pigs and the chickens and the mice in labs, because they are worthy of respect just by virtue of being alive and being sentient. Yeah, but traditionally or historically, unanimously, wildlife photography and conservation photography pretty much excludes those animals and those stories. We need these stories not just because the animals are important and sentient, but because their stories and what we do to them affect climate change. They are the reason that we're burning down the Amazon for grazing land and growing soy crops to feed to cattle and all this. And, you know, it overlaps with the burns in Australia, for example. I went to Australia last year to document the effects of the climate fires or the bushfires on the animals. Mm-hmm. It's all intertwined, and we need to acknowledge those things, because if we're fixing one of the problems, we can fix several of the problems. You know, if we can, yeah, it's obvious. Mm-hmm.
So it's intertwined. There's also animal abuse is ubiquitous. How do you, because it's everywhere, how do you choose which kind of animal exploitation to focus on?
Yeah, good question. These days we're quite strategic in our working with NGOs, and we take a broad view on what NGOs are working on currently. Our focus is always factory farming. I would not say always, but I think about 85% of our lens is focused on factory farming, because we really want to help reduce the number of animals in those places and in fur farms as well. And so strategically, we focus in that direction, and then we look at what NGOs are doing good work, who's effective, who has good media strategies, who has good media connections, who's really hustling, and we aim to work with those NGOs in particular. We've had some fabulous collaborations. My favorite is with a group in Taiwan. They're called EAST, Environment and Animal Society of Taiwan, and they're fantastic with strategy. We went and we spent 2 or 3 weeks shooting. I think we did about 25 shoots. It was insane, like just full on day and night going to places. But with that work, we were able to produce like thousands of images and video that the world uses. And they were in Taiwan. The group has been able to affect change, not just through public education, but through policy and working with the government as well. In addition to that, we were working with the Guardian. So it was We Animals, the Guardian, and a positive NGO. And that is, I think, where the magic happens. And I think it's something we should all strive for as media makers. Who are we working with, and how far can they reach?
Right, yeah, that sounds like a lovely example of how in the animal rights movement we can kind of support each other in a global way in completely different parts of the world. I mean, that must have been such a boost to them to have your support in that way.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And again, it was our donations that allowed us to go over there, 2 of us to fly there. And then we take those images and put them back onto the archive, and they've been seen millions of times the world over, and that in turn generates more donations, because people are seeing that we're doing all this work for free. I mean, to say for free is complex, but yeah, the donations allow us to do it, and then we don't have to wait for NGOs who are also poor, to be able to come up with funds for good photography. NGOs need good photography, but quite often they have someone there with like a little camera who's taking a few images here and there. But we know what a strong role images play in creating change, stills and video. We've seen that throughout history. It's proof. The images are proof. Yeah, think of Tiananmen Square and think of Vietnam, and yeah. So that's what we do as animal photojournalists. We're creating historical documents that are used now, but also hopefully will show future generations what was and what should never again be. Yeah.
I can remember in your talk in 2017, you said about that animal rights photographers should be aware that they're recording history, and that their work are kind of historical artifacts. It's lovely. So
yeah, and that's why we have to continue to do a better job at it. And it's not necessarily about having fancy cameras, though those help. It's about learning composition and how to connect with the individuals in your images. The stronger the images are, the more impact you're going to have. And actually, I think that's a great segue into the images we wanted to talk about that really affected the movement a few decades ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is about looking back over decades of how the animal rights movement has used images. And certainly from my own experience and a lot of other activists that I know, when we first joined the movement, it's often because we've seen really disturbing, horrific pictures of animal suffering. And those were the catalysts for us to change, to become vegan, to be active, and so on. And then we get this kind of shock because we think, oh, well, if that's what changed me, all we need to do is show those pictures to as many people as possible. And bam, the world will be vegan. And then it doesn't happen like that. And we're left wondering why not.
I was surprised as well. I always thought that that's how it was going to work, and then it didn't. It changed back. Yeah.
There's also this saying that if all slaughterhouse walls were made of glass, then we'd all go vegetarian. And for many, many years now, I've questioned that because of that experience. I was just wondering if you could comment on that, about the use of really distressing pictures, perhaps compared to the pictures that we are starting to see that I suspect are conforming more to the characteristics of animal photojournalism that you're kind of forming in this genre. We were talking about, for example, when we chatted last week, about the German journalist Manfred Karaman, who specialized in the 90s on live exports. And if you speak to many people, many vegans, vegetarians in German-speaking countries, and you ask them, was there a moment that helped them change, they often talk about his pictures of cows being hoisted, craned from the ship onto the land. And the photos are simply of a cow hoisted by its hind leg against this brilliant blue Mediterranean sky. There's no blood, obviously it's a horrific picture, but it's not, there's something else going on there. It's a different kind of picture to the pictures that turned me vegan. And
you have that image there, don't you? Do you want to screen share it?
I don't have it with me now, actually.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
But a lot of people will know the pictures that I mean from Manfred Karaman from the 90s.
Yeah, well, this is a big conversation. This right here, where we've landed, is how to reach people and what reaches people, and what level of gore and blood affects people as opposed to something a little more subtle, an intimate connection. We have to document as much as possible. I mean, I document slaughter up close, but I also document do portraits of rescued animals, and the narrative for all of these is really important to share. I also thought that, oh, I can go out and take all these pictures and hold them up to the world and everyone's gonna feel it and make a change. But as we've learned, that's not how it works. I've learned to see APJ as one piece of the puzzle. And there are a lot of exciting pieces right now. There's, the growth of animal law and the growth of plant-based tech and cultivated meat and all these different things that we're doing. So back to APJ, it's one small contribution, but we do have to do it strategically. And if you're going to show blood and guts, just for simplify it and call it blood and guts, how are you going to do it? Why are you going to do it? What are you going to say along with it? Yeah, you have to be prepared and you have to do some hand-holding. Interestingly, with those really graphic images, Hidden, our book, certainly has a lot of those because the book is an unflinching look at what we do to others. And so we weren't going to sugarcoat anything and we were going to show things as they are. But in fact, what we did with the book is we really toned down the colors. We muted the colors. People expect from a book like this for it to be glossy, lots of red, blood that shouts out at you, but we wanted the narrative and the content of the images to shout more than the color of blood, which, yeah, so that's why the images had to be selected. The images that we selected are very, very strong content-wise. They could be black and white and be just as effective. And in fact, muting the colors in the book allows people to engage more in the content, the subject matter of the image, rather than having that visceral shock of blood and guts, as we call it. Yeah, it depends on what. Go ahead.
It's tricky because with the blood and guts, it seems to be a catalyst for some of us, but for many people, it seems to actually just trigger the defense mechanisms so that they just are not open to thinking or they just shut it out completely.
Yeah. Everyone's on a journey, and some of the hard images are going to meet people on that journey in a way that's going to make them open up, and a lot of people are going to get defensive. And so, yeah, it's not just about us as visual people who make visuals. It's not just for us to put out what we want to put out because we've seen it and we're so moved by it. We have to think about who the audience is and work with the right NGOs and partner and message and all of these things that frankly I don't want to make the time to do because everything is such an emergency, right? I just wanted to take the pictures and go, look, you know, but it just does take a lot more than that. And people might be wondering, you know, why did we make a 5-pound, 320-page book of these images of horror? And because a lot of people aren't going to want to look. It's a very difficult book to look at, but I do want to explain that we felt that this was a historical book that was necessary. It was necessary to contribute this to the canon of photojournalism. And one of the editors at The Guardian said that the book was a milestone in photojournalism, which I really appreciated. There are lots of books on war photography, and the book was actually inspired by James Noctway, who's a war photographer, and he made a book called Inferno, and it was about 4 or 5 decades of his work on civil war and genocides and famine and all these things that we do to one another. And it was an indictment. It was this 5-pound, like, you know, proof, a book of proof, again, as I often say, what is and what should never again be. And when I saw that book 15 years ago, I knew eventually I would do something similar for animals, because animals deserved the visibility. Their stories deserve to be memorialized and created in something that is way less transient than social media, for example. So books are important for sure. They have staying power. And when you make such a huge book, it makes people think like, whoa, wow, like let's talk about this. Why was this important? Why would anyone make a 5-pound book of animal atrocities? So, you know, we may not sell millions of books, but what we are doing with the book is going a long way. We're giving it to photo editors. We're, you know, sharing it with people who are influential and who will talk about it.
Yeah, I can understand now why. I did want to ask you why in the age of social media you'd chosen to do this project as a book, but I think that kind of makes it clear. Yeah.
It also, and again, it also gives a platform to all of the contributing photographers. So as they build their careers, they can say, you know, that I am part of this historic book. That's good. It's a good thing to have on your resume, and it'll help bring visibility to their work as well.
Yeah. You've kindly chosen some photos that you would like to show us and give us a little bit of detail around and share some stories with us. Shall we go into that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll keep it brief because there may be some questions and time flies, but I'd love to tell you about some of these images that are well known.
You tell me where you would like me to start. Would you like to tell us about this first picture? This one we've used as the start picture here.
Oh, is that the one of me photographing the pig?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was in Taiwan. And these are pigs that are being raised for the Pigs of God festival. They force feed them into being almost, they weigh up to a ton, and the heaviest pig wins, and the heaviest pig that wins gets slaughtered. It's a public thing. It's honoring the gods. It's really, really something, but mostly it's a moneymaker for a couple of families. So that's what you're seeing me doing there. But that gives people an idea of a little bit of what it looks like to be a photographer in the field. You're out at factory farms. You're getting really filthy, crawling around under mink barns in order to get inside. Yeah, and it stinks and it's horrible. And it's stressful because not only are you facing animals who are unhappy, but you know that you could get caught at any moment and face the ramifications of that.
Is it sometimes with situations like that that you can pretend not to be concerned about the animals and be wanting to take photos of this amazing cultural event?
Yeah, I do that.
Get into the buildings easier that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is often how I get in. I say I'm a photographer and I'm really interested in what's going on here. Quite often I get access to places by saying, you know, truthfully, people don't know where the food comes from, and I'm really interested in telling this story. And then they say, yep, people really don't know what it's like, so come on in. But for the most part, it's good. There's an advantage to going in uninvited because then things haven't been cleaned up. So if you get invited, they might go in ahead and put down some fresh straw, remove the dead bodies, which are often strewn in hallways or just still in a cage, like especially with the hens. And you get into places that have like 7 cages, 7 tiers, hundreds of thousands of birds, and there are rotting bodies, for example, in many of the cages. It's really, really something. And so it's important to show things as they are. And so unfortunately, sometimes it's better to go in unannounced. Yeah, what we do is we tend to go in, you know, from midnight till 5 a.m. or something, and just document how the animals are living and dying, and then just leave without a trace.
Let's move on to another photo. Should we just take the next one that comes up?
I can't see them, so you have to tell me what's there.
You can't see them. Okay, so here we are in the with the kangaroo.
Oh, okay, and the audience can see it?
Yes, I'm surprised that you can't see it, to be honest. Could you see it before when we did a trial run?
Yeah, it seemed like you were screen sharing and it would pop up. Okay, we're getting a lot of yeses here. Looks like people can see it. That's good. Okay, so the kangaroo. That's where we're at. Oh.
You should have. Yeah, sorry about that, Jo. You should have.
They can see it. I don't need to see it. You can just tell me what's there.
But in the bottom at the right, you've got the icon for the presentation.
Oh yeah, there. Perfect. Thanks.
I do.
So that that image. Sorry.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent.
So that image is called Hope in a Burned Plantation. And at the Australian bushfires last year, an estimated 3 billion animals, both wild and domestic, died as a result of these cataclysmic fires that were caused by us. Obviously, Australia is a place which is known for bushfires, but they were also caused by, you know, careless throwing cigarettes out of car windows when it's dry, leaving campfires unattended, and climate. And we are causing climate change. So the fires were worse than ever. And I went for 2 weeks to document what it might be, you know, get a glimpse of what it might be like for the animals. And in this plantation, there were the bodies of kangaroos around. But she was there alive with her child. And I was actually there because I was documenting koala rescues. So in these burned trees, there were koalas who were starving, just like above, literally right above where I was standing. And but there she was. And this image, has won a couple of awards, which is wonderful, and wonderful because it just, you know, points the lens back to all of the work that I'm doing. So as you know, it's mostly not wildlife that I'm photographing, but when I win a wildlife award, it allows me to talk about all the animals.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So next picture. You can see that, right?
It hasn't come up yet. It's just a blank. So which one is there? Oh, there we go. Okay, these are the ducks. I think this is one of those images that just speaks for itself. This is in Taiwan. I don't know why they took the one duck, the one living duck, and hung him upside down at the slaughter line. He was hanging there for at least half an hour to an hour, flapping his wings. But these images are important because they show scale. And this was just one of the many pens in the slaughterhouse. Thousands of birds went through there every day. Maybe hundreds of thousands went through every day. So I do show scale in my work, but then if we go on to probably any of the other images, if we went to the image of the calf and the wheelbarrow, so the calf and the wheelbarrow is almost in direct contrast to that last image. So what I'm doing here is with the same wide angle lens. I love a wide angle because I like to get close to things and close to others, not just things. So with this calf, she's 20 minutes old. She's still wet from birth, and I got up close to her, and there's eye contact there. And that's important in images because any individual who's looking into the camera is looking out at the audience and making eye contact with you. And so here is one of the millions of calves born to dairy cows every year who are taken away from their mothers and raised to be veal or to go back into the dairy system. So at the time I didn't know if she would become veal or, which of course is like, they kill calves at 2 to 6 months of age and eat them for their flesh. Veal, all these euphemisms that I use but try not to use. At the time, I didn't know if she would become veal or a dairy cow, but she did go on to be a dairy cow, which means she would have been impregnated several times, and then she would have been killed at about 6 years of age because she would be considered spent. And the thing about cows is that they can live to over 30, but they don't within these systems we've created.
This photo was used very widely, wasn't it?
It continues to be requested from the archive and used widely. It's been on billboards globally. It's been part of many campaigns. It's one of my more successful images because it's quite impactful. It speaks for itself. You see what's happening. You see that there's a crate there being prepared for this animal who's still even too young to walk. She had actually just taken her first steps, and her mom was cleaning her when the farmer picked her up and put her in the wheelbarrow and took her away. This was one of the locations where I was invited to spend the day. I was working with animal equality at that farm, and we spent the day, and they named her after me, unfortunately. It was just so awkward. They named her Joanne and gave me the bottle to feed her. So her first drink was not from her mother, but from the bottle.
Wow. Okay, so if we live transport.
This is something that I have focused on globally because we often forget about the transport of animals, which is a big, it's a difficult part of their lives. They don't know what's happening. They're corralled and tightly packed into trucks in all sorts of weather. They can die in the extreme cold and in the extreme heat. I've photographed plenty of cases of this. The SAVE movement grew out of one person who was bearing witness to animals going to slaughter. Her name's Anita Kreintz, and the first SAVE group was Toronto Pig Save. and now it's global. There are hundreds of groups globally, and people go to where the trucks are coming into slaughterhouses, and they bear witness and they take pictures. It's quite galvanizing and it's quite moving. I'm a big fan of bearing witness, not just, you know, as someone with a camera, but if you want to see what's going on, join a SAVE group. So this was part of a SAVE vigil, and I really like that this is just such a tender moment, someone reaching out to give a bit of kindness to a pig.
Okay, so I think we'll save Ron till last.
Sure.
Tell us about this.
These are mink kits. They are I'd say they're 6 or 8 weeks old, but they are cuddled up to the body of their dead mother in a cage that is typical of a mink cage. The kit at the back, you can see that that animal is missing an ear. They fight quite a bit in cages this size. Mink are solitary animals, wide-ranging. They live near water. So to live in conditions like these is very, very stressful for them. So they cannibalize one another. Mink are often missing, by the time they're of age to be separated or to be gassed, they're often missing ears and scruffs and scalps, because that is what they do to one another. It doesn't often kill them, and the fur can still be used. So it's not even something that mink farmers are trying to prevent, because the pelt is still salvageable. So that is what is here, and as we know, COVID is affecting mink and mink farming is affecting COVID. And Denmark is now a graveyard to 15 million mink, I think, or is it 17 million? I mean, how can we even have those numbers wrong? How can I have those numbers wrong? It's such a huge number. But yeah, fur farming needs to end. As we know, for every single reason, there's no need for us to be wearing fur whatsoever. And that is one of the efforts that we are, doing at We Animals, is documenting their sorry, sad lives to help affect change.
And it's really clear that how important this work is, so that it's easier for mainstream media to pick up on these stories if the quality of the footage and the photos they're getting. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. And about that, and about this image in particular, which was very hard to light because I'm shooting through this tiny cage, dirty cage, and it's pitch dark. And so people often ask me how I do the work that I do. It's a common question, the technical aspect and the sneaking in and all these things. So we actually did put together a masterclass in the spirit of mentoring other people and getting the technical quality of the images higher across the board and across the globe. And so we do have that masterclass. It's 8 episodes, it's 2.5 hours, it's self-guided with lessons that you can try at the end of each one in order to get more people doing higher quality work in APJ.
That's an incredible resource. And of course, we've got 2 winners here in the audience who will get a place to do that.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so let's move on. Yeah, okay, so we're going to go through to Ron. Tell us about Ron.
Ron is a chimpanzee who was used in invasive research for over 30 years. And I photographed him at Save the Chimps after his rescue. And that's where you see him in his nest of blankets. And he had a huge sanctuary space within which to roam around with lots of other chimpanzees. But he felt safest in this nest that he built every day, which totally broke my heart. He was such a gentleman, and he was very welcoming to other chimps. And anyway, he was one of the favorite individuals there. He and I were the exact same age. We were born 2 months apart. I was able to piece this together based on the charts, his charts from the research facility. And spending a lot of time with those charts, able to piece together things that he had gone through. I won't list them all. It's unbelievable. But, I think about our lives, and, when I was 8 years old, I was out climbing trees. but he had already spent a lifetime in a cage, a 5 by 5 by 7 foot cage suspended above the ground, as though he were just some canary or some object, and so on and so forth. They removed a disc from his neck, and following that invasive surgery, he wasn't given pain medication for 8 days. You can imagine that. And when he was given pain medication, 2 Tylenol, as if that would even really help someone of his size. So he had an incredibly painful life, and he did die prematurely, which is a common fate for animals used in research. But at least he died surrounded by friends and love in the safety of this sanctuary.
And it's lovely to see this typical nest that chimpanzees make for themselves, right? I mean, he's made his here with the blankets, but of course in the wild he'd be making day beds and night beds out of branches and so on. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And obviously heartbreaking for you. I mean, the psychological toll of your work must be enormous. I think it's an encouraging sign that the field of psychology is starting to see that secondary traumatic stress is a real thing that people suffer when they witness violence towards animals. That's thank goodness starting to be taken seriously. But how do you take care of yourself? How do you stay sane, Jo?
Well, there are a lot of things I could say here, and what I do doesn't necessarily work for everybody. And I'm also, I'm not A+ at self-care, I will admit. But what I will say is that my most important tool is changing what I've seen into action of some kind. If I weren't taking action with the images, I would be so depressed. And we can all do that. Like, we all see things and we learn things. So what can we do? We can do little things and we can do big things. And often I'm just doing little things, but I just do my best. I'm gentle with myself. Some days I'm barely doing anything. Luckily, I'm vegan, so at least every day I'm doing something with that. That's something. But sometimes I'm exhausted, and I just have to be exhausted. But my outlook is just to put one foot in front of the other every day, and to do my best, and to make strategic decisions instead of just sort of doing what I want to do or what I feel like doing. And often what I feel like doing is just like shouting and crying, but how can I reach people? So thinking a lot about that. And there's a fantastic book by Patrice Jones, and it's called Aftershock. I recommend it to absolutely everybody. It gives us tools to confront a traumatic world, especially as empathetic people. And when we open our eyes to animal abuses, it's completely overwhelming and exhausting, and you just want to crawl up in a ball. And that's an understandable reaction because the violence is so pervasive and immense. And it's an uphill battle fighting these industries that are perpetuating the violence and the individuals perpetuating the violence. So we do really need to take care of ourselves and be kind to ourselves. And but I mean, we could talk for an hour just on self-care. I'd love to, in fact.
Yeah, I'm often. I used to think it's kind of sounded so fluffy, this idea of taking care of yourself, until I realized that actually that's a sustainable recipe. That's being kind to yourself, giving yourself time out, and not being too hard on yourself, not expecting to have to change the world single-handedly. Those are the things that actually stop you from just switching off altogether and not being able to carry on, right?
Yeah, I tend not to think big picture. Of course I want to achieve animal liberation and contribute to that, but if I were focused on the immensity of that, I would feel really exhausted. Whereas coming back to, focusing on projects week to week, day to day, month to month, and achieving those and making progress in that way. Yeah,
and so many positive projects that you're involved in. Another positive thing that I wanted to mention before we should be rounding up soon, I guess. You've recently been, not only have you been awarded lots of prestigious awards, you've also been a juror awarding other people. awards for their photography work, and for no less than the World Press Photo Competition. Tell us a little bit about that, and I can imagine that that's a big move in terms of growing the genre of animal photojournalism.
There we go. Well, you've said it very well there. So being invited to World Press was definitely an indication that people are interested in animal photojournalism and interested in hearing, having more perspective on that. It was such an honor, you can imagine, to be invited and to be collaborating with all of these editors and bringing my perspective on APJ to the table. I think that happened because we created Hidden, and we created such a massive body of work, influential body of work. And so they thought, and they said as much, you know, okay, well, this We Animals media is doing something new and interesting, and we want their voice at the table.
Okay, right, that's really interesting. So do you imagine that will continue, that role for you?
Yeah, it will. I'm being invited to review the work of other people. I'm being invited into the conservation community recently with the International League of Conservation Photographers. They're incredibly talented people, and they said, hey, can you come and, you know, do some portfolio reviews and get involved with us. So it's going as I had hoped, and it's going really quickly.
Right. You mentioned that a couple of times, that things are moving very quickly.
Yeah, and I guess it's, you know, because we've created something that makes sense and that is timely and that is needed. So it's good feedback, good positive feedback all around.
Yeah.